Hello, everyone. My name is Kelly Kiedis Ogborn, and welcome to the second workshop in our entrepreneurial series in support of World Space Week. Today, we will be discussing how to scale your idea and strategies for securing funding. In case you haven't viewed the first workshop, I recommend doing so as it contains complementary and introductory information to help you best take advantage of today's ideas. In the first workshop, we covered strategies on how to decide on the right business, your ideal market, what you'd like to sell, and your approach. Today, we will focus on how to ensure your idea is successful and what you need to understand about all the various funding avenues available to make your dreams a reality. So without further ado, let's dive into the content. Today's discussion is pretty straightforward. There's going to be two main sections. One, we are going to cover considerations for scaling your idea. And in the second half of this workshop, we're going to be discussing strategies for securing funding. Scaling an idea is a gradual process that requires dedication, persistence, and the ability to learn from both successes and failures. You will be testing the market and engaging with many different stakeholders who are interested in what you are doing. It is important for you to stay focused on your grand vision while also being open to new opportunities and being willing to adapt your strategy as you progress. One thing to keep in mind, which is really critical, is that business success is rarely a linear path, and the best business strategy is often the art of the pivot. Meaning what you thought was your best option might not be, and it might not be working. And so you cannot be afraid to move on to plan B, C, D, E, etc., because eventually you will get to where you need to be. So we will discuss 5 steps in scaling your idea. And these are understanding what your idea is, conducting market research, building a solid foundation, assembling the right team, and then lastly, leveraging technology and innovation. We covered this in the previous workshop and it was labeled as foundational questions, but I want to cover this section again because it is a good reminder, and also these will be the foundation upon which everything else that you build in your business. Before you begin anything, we need to address why you are in business or why you are going into business. And you really need to be able to interact with these questions and know them cold so that you can utilize them in various aspects of your strategy, but also answer questions along the way. So the first one is, what problem are you trying to solve? And you want to think about this from the perspective of the customer, not from your point of view. Even though there will be and should be some overlap, getting your answers and language to more closely reflect what the customer's is will help you tell a more compelling story. The second is, what is the value proposition to the client? This really is the reason why you exist and why people should care about what you do. If you do not have a good answer to this, then you do not need to go any further until you do, because your value proposition will be weaved throughout your entire business narrative and ultimately help shape your strategy, because it also informs who you go after as customers. We did talk about the value proposition formula in the previous workshop, so if you haven't seen it, please go back and review because it will make it much easier for you to develop one. The next is, what is the market applicability? It is helpful here to really start broad and then narrow down into the specific subsets of each market. Also, I want to challenge you to really get creative here. You want to think beyond what the obvious markets are that your products and service fits into, and really try to imagine if there are components of your offering that fit into new or adjacent markets that you maybe haven't considered yet. The next is, why is it better than what already exists? If you are moving into a crowded market space with lots of competition, chances are that your potential customers are already being courted by competitors or are already working with some of your competitors. So, how do you go about convincing them to work with you instead? Spend some time thinking about the problem that you are trying to solve, and remember that it's from their perspective. And then you want to be able to clearly articulate why you are better and why they should work with you. The next is, who are your potential customers? You really want to further break down the specific subsets of potential markets and really get granular on the who, because you need to make sure that there are actual tangible customers within your markets of interest, not just the fact that you think they are there. And then lastly, when will you be market ready, or when will your product be market ready? Essentially, when can customers engage with it? You really have to be able to explain the core concept of your idea and also explain the problem your idea solves and its unique value proposition. We covered this in the value proposition in the last workshop. So again, please go back and take a look at that. One thing I will say about this section as a pro tip is that if you have any real life anecdotes of how you solve a pain point for a potential customer, please include it, because it will bring to life your business idea and really make it feel more real for those who are interacting with it. The next section we'll cover is conducting market research. And market research is really a valuable tool that empowers businesses to make informed decisions, reduce their risk, identify opportunities, and tailor their strategies to meet customer demands effectively. Investing in it really is a smart decision for growth and for long-term success, because it will serve you at different paths along your journey. Market research is really done to achieve a couple of main objectives, and these can shift based on what you need at that particular time. So the main objectives that it is meant to achieve is to understand customer needs, to identify market opportunities, to minimize risk, to conduct competitive analysis, to optimize your marketing and your advertising efforts, to improve product development, inform a pricing strategy, which is always an ongoing, evolving question on behalf of companies and entrepreneurs. And then lastly, it can also really help attract investors. For today and the purposes of this workshop, we are going to focus on three of them. We're going to focus on understanding customer needs, conducting competitive analysis, and identifying market opportunities. I want to note that there are many companies and individuals out there that will help companies achieve their own market research. So you can pay for tailored market research. But for entrepreneurs that are strapped for cash, or those that want to take more of a DIY approach in the beginning, I have some tools for you. So the first is looking at customer needs. And the goal here is really to help you gain insights into the needs, preferences, and pain points so you can better develop products and services that align. And so what you want to start by looking at are your core customers and stakeholders. And there are many different people who can and will play a part in your success. And so for this exercise, what you want to do is brainstorm as many as you can for each of the corresponding questions. And at this point, don't really worry about filtering too much, because you will continue to refine this in other parts of your strategy. So the three types of people outlined on this slide will be the ones that are most critical to engage, because they will really help you flesh out who your core customers and stakeholders might be. So you really want to ask yourself these three questions. First is, who are the people influenced by your work? So these can be direct customers or customers of adjacent markets that will ebb and flow based on your success and based on the products that you put out. The second is, who are the people and organizations who can influence your operations and decision making? Think of regulatory bodies, trade associations, policymakers, essentially entities that have the power to wield decisions that could enhance or halt elements of your business. This is just as critical as those who are going to actually buy your product. And then third are, who are experts in your field that can help validate your work? These are peers, champions, researchers, academic experts, etc. Really, these are people who have clout and have an authoritative voice in your sector or industry. So when they lend their support to you, it really means something. This can go a really long way, especially as you're a young company evolving, because if there are people that already have credibility and they say you're credible, it's just going to open a lot more doors for you. And then once you have your list, what you're going to really want to hone in on are the pain points of each of these people. So you want to write out what they could be and how you plan to alleviate them. What this really hits at is understanding their needs and goals and how your work addresses them. By doing this work up front, what you're really doing is laying the groundwork for your engagement and messaging strategy down the road. So, this step is really critical and beneficial overall. And really, to better gauge pain points beyond what you've observed, you can also deploy some helpful and cost effective methods, such as conducting group surveys, focus groups, using beta users. Any of these will enable you to continuously gather important feedback. And it is also critical because it allows you to better interpret signals. We in the space industry, and really in any business, but particularly in space, you want to be able to decipher between what is actually a real opportunity. So think about a viable path for your business and what is hype. One of the things that is wonderful about space is we always talk about it being ripe with opportunity, and there's a lot of different avenues and technologies that are being able to be engaged. But there is this divergent point between people getting a little bit too excited about what the future will bear and not what's actually driving business opportunities now. And so you want to be able to view your business from the lens of really practical measures that are going to be inserted into space now, but allow you to grow with the hype. If you sometimes just lead with the hype, so for example, if you are just focused on Mars colonies and asteroid mining, that's a little too in the future. And so, from a business strategy, there might not be the parameters and investment and partnerships available to you now if you're looking to start a business at this current time. The next we're going to focus on is competitor analysis. And when we talk about competition, there are really two types. And this is a main distinction for you to really drive home because it's going to allow you to fully understand the landscape that you are working with. So, when we talk about competition, there are really two types. There is direct competition and there is indirect competition. So, direct competition refers to competitors who offer a comparable product or solve the same problem as you do. An example of this would be Walmart versus Target. They're both big box stores that you go into to buy very similar products. Chevy versus Ford, both car companies, or Pepsi versus Coke, both beverage companies. In these instances, it really comes down to consumer preference, and that comes through brand loyalty, which generally develops really early on. The user experience and that what the company provides also really helps drive this. Company values, product quality, etc. In the space industry, it is trust and alliances that are really critical in driving this. Trustworthy companies go a long, long way. Established companies go a long, long way. So if you're looking to get into space, you do want to develop that brand loyalty, brand uniqueness, and start to get engaged in the conversation early. Indirect competition is anything that competes with you for your customers' attention and dollars. An example of this is if you have some free time, you have the option of going to a baseball game versus going to the movies. So, two baseball teams like the Dodgers and the Angels, which are both baseball teams in the Los Angeles, California area, would be in direct competition with each other because if somebody wanted to go see a baseball game, they would go to see either of those. However, they are in indirect competition with a movie theater if somebody just wanted to spend a Sunday afternoon in a particular way. And so, considering who are on each side of the camp will really help you hone in on your messaging strategy, how you talk about your value proposition, and also really where you spend your time and attention based on who might be the most immediate threat for you at the time. One thing to also keep in mind is that a common form of indirect competition that a lot of companies face, especially if you are creating any sort of revolutionary technology or something that is extremely new, is the status quo. So if you are butting up against a gold standard of how something has always been done for decades, or an ideology that many believe is good enough, the status quo will be an indirect competition for you. Think about the advent of the automobile. At that time, most people thought that bicycles or horse-drawn carriages were sufficient enough modes of transportation. Even though the automobile gave them something that was much more efficient, they didn't necessarily think that they needed it. Now, we don't see horse-drawn carriages anymore. We still see bicycles, but cars reign supreme. And so in these instances, What you may have to do is convince your potential clients that doing nothing is more costly than investing in your solution. And another helpful trick to do this is really to paint a picture of what the world could be like. So you want to get them invested and excited in the possibility of it, and then lead with your product or solution and how you bring that to bear. And one thing that I suggest that can actually help you do this is utilizing a persona canvas. And this can be developed for yourself and your competitors. And really, what this is it's a tool that helps refine key information about your company that you will use in both conversations and presentations that can help you drive home why you're better and who you're better against. It can also be a really potent tool to better understand what you are up against if you create one of these for your competitors. And so a persona canvas is broken down into 8 sections. It has the company name in the middle. And for the purposes of this workshop, I created a fictitious company called Inferno Inc. I know it is very clever because it deals with fire retardant clothing. But what we do is we provide flame retardant coatings, rather, for spacesuits, textiles, and other fabrics. And when we filled out the persona canvas, what you do is you follow the heading prompts. And for the purposes of today, I'm really going to focus on the bottom 2, so competition and differentiators. So just walking through really quickly, you want to fill out what your product and service is. So we are a flame retardant clothing, like I said, for spacesuits, textiles, and other fabrics. Some of the target markets we look at is human spaceflight operations, aircraft design and manufacturing, as well as workforce protective gear. Our value proposition is the ability to make anything fire retardant. We can either be sprayed onto existing products or included in the design and manufacturing phase. Our business goals are to expand beyond the current market of fire stations and the space industry. We're looking at 5% sales growth and new revenue from different streams, and we wanted to get invited to whatever event is coming down the horizon. Our core offering, it's really wholesale quantities of the actual tool and the liquid for lots of different applications. Our gaps and our challenges are access to the industry. So we really need to get introductions to key people. We need to be able to scale to mass volumes, and we also don't have a chemist on staff to be able to scale properly. Our competition here, and these are the 2 that we're going to be focusing on, is Smoke No Fire Incorporated and Flame Be Gone. And our differentiators from our competition is that we can withstand higher heats. We have a quicker application and dry time. We dry clear and there's no residue or odor. We're environmentally friendly and there's no hazardous chemicals. So as you can see, each of these boxes in and of itself does take a bit of time to get your message right and get your refinement down to keep it very short and to the point. But once you're able to do so, this will help you tremendously in all aspects of scaling your idea. So again, focusing on the competition and the differentiators, what we are now going to do is take those answers and fill out how we are different from direct competition and indirect competition. So on the left-hand side, you can see we brainstormed as many examples of competition as we came up with. So we have those 2. And so with Smoke No Fire and Flame Be Gone, what our differentiating qualities are is all the things I mentioned on the last slide, withstanding higher heats, quicker dry time, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. But what about indirect competition? That isn't as blatantly obvious. So as I mentioned earlier, this type of competition is anything that competes with you for your client's attention and dollars. And sometimes a common form can manifest as the status quo. So things that are simply good enough. So in the fire suppression world, this could be anything like fire safety precautions, design standards that are in place already, or alternate ways to really mitigate and enhance something that will catch on fire. In these instances, what you may have to do, again, is to convince your clients that doing nothing is more costly than investing in your solution. And depending on the situation, these alternative measures may be costly, they may be time consuming, or they may be impossible to implement and uphold. So in our case, for Inferno's case, the differentiating qualities from these indirect competitors is that since you cannot predict the future, our solution safeguards against the unknown. You can't plan for everything, but you can be truly prepared. So you want to be clever in how you position that, because different people are going to respond in different ways and their impact model is going to be different. But that is an example of how you would be able to message against potential indirect competition. So building upon these answers, let's now look at market opportunities, which is really looking at market applicability. And what this is really going to do is drill down into your potential customer's market and where you really fit within it. A good starting point for this is to review your responses to the previous exercise, so how you differentiate from your competition. And then you want to see if there is a common theme or pattern that can be summarized. So for our case, we know that the biggest summation of our differences is that we can make anything fire retardant. So this slide really looks at 4 deterministic elements that are critical in helping you decide which market or markets you should focus on. And I am going to continue to answer them in the context of Inferno Inc. So the first is to summarize your key differentiators. And is there one thing that stands out? So for us, it can be boiled down to flexibility. We are able to make anything fire retardant. As I said, you can't plan for the future, but you can be prepared for it. So flexibility is really our main differentiating quality. The next question is, why should others care about your work? What this is really talking about is impact. So fire-resistant coating can save lives and valuable infrastructure, but it is also a way to be protective against unknown circumstances. And so if you think of places like Australia and California, where catastrophic fires are common occurrences, our solution can help give residents, municipalities, and community planners a bit more peace of mind, which truly is priceless. But even beyond communities that are prone to fires, what we are also talking about is the need for prevention. Fires can happen out of nowhere, leaving seconds to react. And so by using this coating, you're introducing a variable and deterministic factor to increase survivability rates. So I hope you're seeing in these examples how I'm using this company to answer these questions, because it will help you better clarify how you will do it for your company. The third question is, what technical areas does your work impact? Here, what you want to do is brainstorm all possible areas that it can touch. And so by focusing on the technical areas first, what it will help you do is begin to see all of the potential industries that these technical areas fall into, and really then help you further whittle down your potential markets. And so, for example, for Inferno, some of the examples we came up with is it touches material design, it touches manufacturing, it touches chemistry, and it also impacts environmental science. And then finally, what markets does your work impact? And so this one is really broad, and this is really based on your key differentiators. So why consumers should care. Who could actually use this, and why do they want to buy it? So for Inferno again, and I will do this one specifically for relation to the space market, we brainstormed on the following. It will impact construction and infrastructure companies. It can benefit and impact lunar colony planning. It can also look at general aerospace and aviation, as well as space tourism. And so for this last question, you really want to jot down everything that comes to mind, because in the end, you don't actually have to go after every market that you list, but you will use these to decide which are the best market or markets for your product or service. And this will also help you understand that you have been completely thorough and that you haven't left any stone unturned. So when you move confidently in one market direction, you know that you've at least explored the ones that might be a possibility. And even if they're not an immediate possibility, they may be something that you want to go after down the road when you're in a bit more stable place. The next section we want to look at is building a solid foundation. And now that we have some tools for you to begin to conduct your market research, what we want to do now is build a solid foundation for you to scale upon. And what this really gets into is thinking through all of the elements of your business, creating a business plan and strategy, and everything that comes with that. This is also going to make sure that your business model is scalable. Much of your market research will fit into your business strategy. And one thing to remember is that scaling an idea as an entrepreneur involves taking a concept that has proven successful in a small setting and really expanding it to reach a larger market and to achieve significant growth. As a fundamental rule, when building something new, it really is critical to understand that there are two proofs of concept. The first is if the technology or product works, and the second is if the market wants it. The first outcome is often easier than the second because there are many market conditions that can affect the outcome. And so, what we're going to do now is explore how you can set yourself on the right foot to be able to make sure that those market conditions work in your advantage. And the way we're going to do this is to start to create your company's commercialization vision. And on this slide, you will see some various examples, and what you want to do is circle all that apply. You also are going to want to write down in your own words, and again, they don't really have to be finessed for prime time right now, what your vision looks like for all of the options above. So, do you want to license your technology, product, or service? What would that look like? What specifically are you licensing, and who are you licensing to? If you choose a service, what is that service? What is your customer getting when they engage with your company, and what platform do they engage you on? If you chose sales of acquisition of your product, how much do you want to sell it for? Would you walk away after the sale, or do you want to have some part in the new venture? What level of maturity does your product need to be to get sold or to get acquired? All of these questions and considerations are things that you should think about early on in your strategy, because it will at least give you a baseline of what you're willing to do and what you're not willing to do as you go about and engage potential partners, customers, and investors, because it will give you a path of least resistance to allow you to bounce ideas off of. And so go down the rabbit hole with these questions. Write down as many as you can. You can never really be over prepared for what might happen. It's much better than never having thought about it to begin with. And one thing to also keep in mind is that some companies actually might have various versions of all of these scenarios in their head, and that actually is okay. If you don't know what you quite want to do at this stage, what I would suggest doing is filling out each of these to see what you might like best and what kind of fits more with your overall strategy. Remember that you're not really being forced to choose one path at a time. You're also not being forced to choose the path that you choose at this time. Rather, this is to plan for potential scenarios that might pop up in the future. And then on the right-hand side, you will see a bunch of different funding sources. At this stage, really circle all that you'd be willing to accept or that interest you. And so for now, this is really meant to help your creative thought process on the types of funding out there and how that might work for your company. And we're going to go into those in depth in the second part of this workshop. The next few examples of how to really engage this commercialization vision, we're going to run through fairly quickly since a lot of them are pretty self-explanatory. The next thing you're going to want to do is you want to list any current or potential funders that you've considered. And you really want to be very thorough with this list and brainstorm anybody that comes to mind, even if it is far-fetched. You don't have to act on all of these. Rather, again, you want to make sure that no stone is unturned. You also want to look at how you could potentially diversify your product. You'll see the term deconstruction in the descriptor text. And what we mean by that are all of the potential core elements to your product or service that are instrumental to its design, but can also stand on their own. So this is looking at subcomponents or potentially a diversity in your offering that you're going to give down the road. What this really helps you explore is the possibility of tangential markets, again, that you can move into, different sort of product lines, but also looking at subsidiary goods that you might already have developed in the production of your main good that are just ripe for opportunity in different markets. Then what you're going to want to describe is what your core product or service is. And this is really looking at what you will be actually selling. And the trick here is to avoid buzzwords. So you want to really get to the physical description of what your clients are going to get, not the marketing jargon of how you would write it on some sort of document. Next, you are going to want to understand and identify what your technology readiness level is. If you don't know what this is already, a technology readiness level scale is a widely used term, which many of you have probably heard before. And this is really used broadly within the government world, but also it's starting to get adopted into the commercial aspect. And this particular graphic I like a lot because it helps break down the parallel distinctions and definitions between how it's used in the government R&D world and also how it's used in the commercial world. So on the left is a generalization of how the government would define each TRL, and on the right is how the commercial world loosely defines it. And for the sake of this sort of commercialization study, you want to identify where you are now because you will get asked this by many different folks in your conversations. Then you want to check where you are in each product development cycle. Are you still at the idea phase? Are you researching? Are you at a prototype phase? This will also help you refine when you get asked these quick questions about where you are and where you need to go. And then you want to move into your efforts to be market ready. And what this is really looking at when you plan to be market ready. So you want to list any monthly or quarterly projections. You want to identify what level of effort is necessary. If your product or service is incomplete, how so? Be specific. And if you have any financial restraints. Now, keep in mind that every business will always say that they have financial restraints. And so for this question, you should really look at it in terms of the minimum amount of funds necessary to be ready. So think about it as your MVP. If you know that your minimum viable product is going to take $100,000 to get to a place where you can start to market it, use that as your baseline and then continue to iterate this scale as you move up in tech maturity. So continuing on with these efforts, and this is a bit to be more granular from what we discussed before, but what are your resource restraints? So think of these in the context of getting to be market ready, as we discussed. Do you lack talent? Do you lack equipment? What else might you not have? This will really help highlight the gaps you'll need to close beyond making sure that your product or service is viable. And then you're also going to be looking at your technical challenges that you need to solve. In the subtext, I mentioned that generally investors and funders know that technology is a work in progress. So the key here is really to be open and frank about the risks so they know what to expect and how to mitigate and pivot if necessary. In the space industry, it is a really capital intensive market, a capital intensive industry. So everybody knows that we are trying to do hard things and it takes a lot of money. They just want to make sure that you have thought through every possible scenario and so that you are better prepared in your business plan and scalability to be able to A/B test where necessary. So now that we've discussed some of the granular pieces of this, let's take it a step further and start to get into your scalability plan. And often companies make the mistake where they race to get their first client without thinking about the many seamlessly and seemingly invisible necessities that are really critical to ensure that you provide them with world-class service. You don't want to take on a contract where you are required to turn things around in 1 week and you only have one employee. So here are some strategies to better take advantage of that. In your scalability plan, these are some of the elements that you need to work out. First, you need to start with your ultimate vision. So where are you looking to go in the future? The goal here is to really think big. Where do you want your company to end up in your perfect vision, in your perfect scenario? The next thing you'll want to do is look at your expected timeline for your first sale after product launch. So when do you estimate you'll actually start to generate revenue? This is going to be a really critical question and piece when you engage with investors. And this date can and most likely will shift, but it's necessary to identify it now and have a goal as an anchor date, and then slate in all the activities necessary to get you there. What you also want to continue to do is to consider your corporate structure. So when you start to bring in new revenue, new opportunities, and new personnel to meet those demands, will they be full-time employees? Will they be contractors? How are you going to scale? How many at what time? Make these considerations now. And so you have it in your strategy and in your back pocket to be able to move when the opportunities move. And this type of personnel, whichever path you go, will dramatically affect how you set up your business, both structurally and legally. And it can also affect your partnerships with potential investors and with development partners. And so that is a really large component of doing business in the space industry. So it is really critical that you sit down and think through how you want to scale and how that might affect operations. And then finally, you want to estimate what percentage of your budget you're going to spend on various aspects of your business. So you will go through many, many, many different versions of this based on where you are in your commercialization and business process. And just as an example, I broke down the budgets for our company Inferno for the purposes of this workshop to really show you how you can delegate necessary funds to get to product launch. And then on the next slide, I will show you how I delegated funds to sustain and grow the business once there are customers. So on this slide, this is looking at achieving product launch. So really getting to that MVP. And the projected breakdown is as follows. As you can see, at this point, the most critical investment for me is research and development and testing because I am developing the technology. And so that makes up 65% of the budget. So right now, R&D is 40%, marketing is 5% because we don't necessarily have a budget yet, or rather we have a budget, we don't have a technology to market yet. Testing is 25%. Again, we're getting to that technical MVP. Production is 15% because we're really not going to any sort of scalability or growth proposal at this time. And then overhead is 15% because that's things to just keep the lights on. But you can see the way it shifts after we have launched. So assuming at this point, we have gotten to a product launch and we have things to push out. So now the budget will need to shift toward a stronger marketing and production focused. So research and development has shifted to 15% because now I'm doing small iterations and working on the innovation necessary to get me to my next product. 40% of the budget is now marketing because we need to tell people what we have. Testing is 5%. Production is now 25% because we're physically building the thing, and our overhead is still 15%. So these examples should allow you to better juxtapose how you play around with budgets and consider these percentages during your various times of development to get you to your desired end state, no matter where you are. And the last thing for scalability that we want to work through are the resources that need to be put in place for you to succeed. And we can think about these in two ways. The first is the product gaps. So this really looks at the people and processes required to manufacture and create your product. And then the second are the business gaps. So these are the people and processes required to fulfill client needs. And so therefore, in the spaces provided, what you want to do is list all of those resources, how much they will cost to obtain, and when you think you are going to need them by. So to begin with, we broke them down into product resources and business resources. And you can go through some examples here, such as technical experts, supply chain, etc., because that will really show you the types of things that you need to get granular on. And for your business considerations, potentially, it might be a client service professional. It might be an administrative assistant. It might be sales. Whatever they are, list them. And again, you want to be specific in the role that they are going to achieve for your company, as well as the projected cost and how long you will take to secure them. The reason for this is that oftentimes resources are underestimated into how long it will take to secure them and when you'll have the money to secure them. And I've worked with many companies in the past that are so busy getting their technology to a point where it is available and able to be sold, but they don't have the personnel to actually sell. And so this needs to be part of your strategy early and often so that when the technology is ready, you're able to jump and scale with it. And then what you want to do is you want to order them based on your timeline and area of importance. So when you will need them in place, why you need them in place, and how much money it's going to be required to do it. And this will then be a critical component to include in your overall launch strategy, along with the details to get to your minimum viable product, because you will be able to see that as you are pushing for tech development, if you need a sales associate, that is your number one priority above all of the other personnel and business gaps. A pro tip is also to add notes alongside for any obstacles or pitfalls that you might foresee. For example, as we mentioned, hiring personnel can really take a long time, but it can actually take a very long time if you're looking for a niche skill. So, based on your notes of what you're looking for, you may be able to reorder some of your components to allow for those instances to occur rather, and build them into your strategy. And so now that we've sort of put your scalability in plan, we have some of those building blocks. Let's now look at how you assemble the right team to be able to close some of those personnel and business gaps. I want to take a moment here to discuss why assembling the right team is really critical. Attracting and recruiting talent can take a very, very long time, and it is also really critical to be able to hire people around you that do things differently than you so you can make a rounded out staff. In the space industry and the global space ecosystem as it is now, we are encountering a workforce gap and a workforce shortage. And this is coming from people who are self selecting into the industry from a career aspect, but also the technical capabilities that are allowing broader companies to be able to scale and to be competitive. And so, what you want to do in your strategy is to monitor the trends that are going to make sure that you have the talent required for where the market is going, and that you have the talent required to be able to fulfill what your ultimate goal is. A piece about assembling the right team that is really critical is that sometimes companies can be really heavily reliant on talent centric individuals that do not scale well. If you have two people in your company that you put on every project, you are not going to be able to then respond to demand signals. So what you need to do is figure out how to capitalize on all of the talent that you have internally and really spread out the tasks accordingly. A great team can really make or break a business. And so you want to be able to get this strategy right. Another thing that this applies to is it also applies to partnerships. Partnerships are a very viable and actually a very good business strategy within the space ecosystem, especially for smaller companies that want to become part of larger scale tech projects within space, but don't necessarily have the manufacturing ability or potentially the in-house capability to do it. One of the pitfalls that I have seen people do is that sometimes they are apprehensive in these partnerships because they don't want to give away any sort of ownership of their company. They want to hold it all in because it's their technology, it's their baby. But one of the things I will caution is that owning 100% of a company that is worth $0 still gives you $0 at the end of the day. And so you don't want to be afraid to share part of the pie, to share part of, your overall growth plan if it allows you to focus on what you are good at and then hire or partner for the rest of it, because that is going to be sometimes the only way that you're going to be able to achieve your objectives. One thing I will plug is that we at Space Foundation have Space Foundation University, and we actually have a really good class on how you can master team dynamics. You'll see it in the middle. And so if you are interested in how to do this with more precision and more intention, I recommend checking out that course in your own time. And then the last piece I want to touch upon in scaling an idea is how to leverage innovation and technology for your benefit. What you want to do here is really explore how automation and digital tools can help streamline processes for you, and they will also allow you to constantly monitor how you can innovate to stay competitive. You cannot afford to be stagnant, especially in an industry like space when it is rapidly evolving in terms of technologies and opportunities. And so I said at the beginning of this workshop that the best business strategy is the art of the pivot. And you really want to adopt that philosophy and never stop questioning how it can serve you. So continue to know where technology is going, how it can be adopted to allow you to be more effective, and also understand how your own innovation strategy should and can continue to iterate as you scale your company. So now that we have thought through how to scale your idea, let us get to the $1,000,000 question, quite literally, in how do I secure funds? In this section, what we are going to cover here are the different types of funding available to you and explore a sample engagement strategy. And for any business, I think this is intuitive and inherent to all entrepreneurs, but it is really essential to understand the terms and conditions that are associated with each funding source and carefully be able to evaluate the implications of accepting these funds from external investors. So each funding option comes with its own advantages and disadvantages. And as a business owner, you need to be able to choose the approach that best aligns with your goals and your growth plans, which we went through in depth before. Additionally, what you want to be able to do is present a clear and compelling business plan or pitch, as I mentioned before, when you were going with these investors. And so some of those considerations that we went through in scaling an idea will help you understand which of these funding mechanisms might be better for you and will allow you to have better and more thoughtful conversations with investors. It is also worth noting that funding sources can vary depending on the stage of the business and the amount of funding that is required, and also specific circumstances. And so some companies may engage with different funding sources at different times. And what I am going to go through now are some common methods used to secure funds. I know these slides are a bit tight with text, but it's meant for you to have a snapshot of all of the different prospects to go forth and look at after this conversation. So the first and quite often the most common when someone is just starting to build a business is looking at bootstrapping. And so what this is it's funding the business using personal savings, resources, or assets. What bootstrapping does is it allows the entrepreneur to retain full ownership and control, but it also may limit the scale of initial operations. As you can imagine, some people, if they just have very limited resources, are not able to get to the next steps with pure bootstrapping, but bootstrapping could get them to a point to be attractive to other sources of funding because it can get them to a more mature level of tech fruition. The next example is family and friends. This is just a different version of bootstrapping. So this is looking at borrowing money from family members or friends who believe in your vision and are willing to invest in the business. This is pretty straightforward. The terms and negotiations of what you do with family and friends can be all across the board. Sometimes people just loan money. Sometimes people want equity, but that structure is going to be completely up to the entrepreneur and the person they are engaging with. The next is an angel investor. And these are generally high net worth individuals who invest their own personal funds in early stage startups for exchange of equity. They often not only provide financial support, but they generally are sometimes really involved in the business, either on the board or as an advisor, or will help provide industry connections because they have a close personal vested interest in seeing the business succeed. The next is venture capital firms, also known as VC. This is very commonly known by all entrepreneurs. But what these folks do is they generally invest larger amounts of money in startups with really high growth potential. And in exchange, they receive equity and sometimes become part owners of the business or at least sit on the board of directors. VCs typically invest in startups with proven business models and significant growth prospects. And so sometimes you have to be a pretty further along or a bit past the ideation phase to attract that of a venture capital firm. One thing I will say for VCs within the space ecosystem is we are at a really interesting time right now with investment. I mentioned earlier in this workshop about moving past hype and actually showing a tangible, viable path. There is a lot of venture capital available in space, but we are now starting to see a concentration in companies that are showing real promise in return on investment in 3, 5, 7 years. There are still some investors that are looking at the promise of space, so technology or enabling technologies that may be good for asteroid mining or may be good for moon colonies. But right now, the money is really very it's close home. In the first workshop, I did mention that the space to Earth market, so utilizing space-based technologies for life on Earth, drives about 95% of the global space economy. And that is still primarily what investors are investing in. So they are looking at telecommunications, they are looking at broadband, they are looking at satellites, they are looking at launch, they are looking at a lot of technologies that are really driving or will drive commerce activities in low Earth orbit when commercial space stations coming online. So a lot more of those near-term opportunities. That is still where a lot of the money is being put at the current moment. So take that into consideration, and also as a strategy, I would look at where VC money is going to understand where the highest growth potential might be. And the next on this slide is bank loans. And these are pretty straightforward. They're traditional loans that can be an option for established businesses generally. So you have to actually have a prototype, and you actually have to be showing some sort of revenue at this point, and you have to have a solid credit history. And so in order to get a traditional bank loan, entrepreneurs may need to provide collateral or demonstrate some sort of clear payment plan. But this is another good route to go, and it's generally pretty straightforward for a lot of people to understand the terms. The next is crowdfunding, and this can be a really successful strategy for smaller companies that may have a product that is going to really excite a lot of stakeholders and need to get it out into the market, but haven't really been able to secure maybe one source of investment. So what crowdfunding is it's raising funds from a large number of individuals, and it's often done through online platforms. And so there are different types of crowdfunding. There can be reward-based crowdfunding, so you get rewards for what you pay if somebody puts into it. There's equity crowdfunding, so if you pay early on, you get a percentage if the company is successful. There's donation-based, and that doesn't necessarily have a financial return. So depending on what it is you're developing and what it is you're trying to sell, there are different strategies that might work best for who your customers and stakeholders are. The next on the list are small business administration loans. So SBA loans, that's a United States term, but these type of loans also exist in other countries. But I'm using the United States as an example. The Small Business Administration does offer loans specifically designed to support small businesses. Terms and conditions vary, but they do exist. Government grants and subsidies. This is another really successful path, and also an opportunistic path within the space ecosystem. And these are looking at grants, subsidies, or financial incentives to support specific industry growth, technologies, or economic development initiatives. So these can be anything coming out of small business administration loans, as we mentioned before. In the United States, they're called SBIRs, and they're essentially scaled as sort of seed capital. The European Space Agency has their own grants and subsidies and loans. So does NASA. So it just depends on what government you're going after, but there are a lot of opportunities, and they're generally segmented based on the overall goal or the technology subset. So definitely take some time combing through what they are, because they could work for your bottom line. There's corporate partnerships is another, and I mentioned this a bit in the beginning, that partnering, especially in the space ecosystem, is a pretty viable path. And what this is looking at is forming a strategic partnership with a larger company that can provide funding. And what they get in exchange is access to your new technologies or your product or your idea to help open up markets and create new things for them. And so this can be really successful if you are missing core components of you to be able to scale, and a corporate partner has it. Becoming a supplier to a prime or a sub to a prime, that's another way to say it, is a really good strategy as well. There are incubators and accelerators that exist, and this is another actual funding path, because oftentimes if you participate in certain incubators and accelerators, they may give funding. What they also do is they give in-kind mentorship and access that sometimes can offset the need for funding because it can further along your business model, potentially in an expedited way. And also, sometimes they offer pitch competitions and other things that if you win, you also get capital. The one thing to consider when you're looking at different incubators and accelerators that do offer money is take into account what their equity model is. Oftentimes, for that funding, they do want some sort of exchange in equity, and those models vary, and the appetite of the company to give away that kind of equity at an early stage may also vary. And then there is revenue and pre-sale. That is pretty straightforward. And then the last one is convertible notes. And so what this looks like is somebody issues debt. It's issuing debt that can be converted into equity at a later stage. And so what this does is it can often provide short-term funding solution to the company with flexible terms, but on the back end, it is going to be converted into equity, and what that equity looks like and at what percentage can vary based on what the terms and conditions are negotiated. So as you can see, there are many, many, many different ways that you can go about raising funds and securing funds for your idea. The biggest thing that you need to consider is that securing funds is a long tail game. You need to be persistent, and you also cannot be discouraged. Just because you hear no or don't get granted in different avenues doesn't mean that there isn't an option for you. There is a lot of diversity and a lot of segmentation within the space ecosystem. And so it just comes down to finding where your right people are and who's going to buy into your idea. And a lot of that comes through many of the tactics we talked about earlier in developing your value proposition, really understanding your core differentiator, understanding how you're going to scale. A lot of these things are really going to set you up on a broader path to make a bigger case and more successful and stronger case, rather, when you were asking for funds. So what this slide goes over are some elements of a strategy for seeking funds, and there are really 12 points to this. Some of these may apply now, some of these may apply in the future, but I want to run through them quickly as considerations for you and your business. And so the first is what we did today on this workshop is really refining your business idea and plan. And so what this comes down to is developing a clear and compelling business idea that solves a real world problem in the market. You want to give a comprehensive business outline. You want to talk about your vision. You want to talk about your target market. A lot of those elements we talked about in the scaling your idea will play into your business plan. So you already have a bit of footing to insert into that roadmap. The reason you want to have this is that a well-prepared plan shows investors that you have a solid understanding of your business and its potential success. This is really going to help you drive better conversations. The next piece in this, which actually is probably the most critical, is identifying the right investors. What you want to do is research and target investors who have an interest in your industry or have similarly invested in other startups. So you want to look for angel investors, venture capital firms, or really other funding sources that align with your business's stage and growth plans. Not all investors are the right investors for you. There are different portfolio verticals. There are different funding thresholds. So doing your research up front will also save you and them a lot of time and headache to figure out where the match actually is. The third is that you want to establish a really strong network and start to build relationships. And this really comes about making yourself a known entity and engaging with the ecosystem. And so you want to attend networking events. You want to go to conferences, go to different pitch competitions, even if you're not pitching. The people that you want to get to often are there. And also, I think it's just good practice to see how other businesses do it, because it may give you some tips to enhance what you do. And really building these strong relationships with investors can significantly improve your chances of securing funding for a couple of reasons. We talked early on about the necessity of trust, especially within the space industry. The same goes with investors. An old adage is that people like to do business with people they like and trust. That still exists. But also, some investors, even if they aren't the right one for you, might know who is. And so building a strong network and having these relationships will help you cut through the red tape pretty quickly and get you to the right person that you need to go to. The next is creating a compelling pitch deck. We talked about this at length in the last workshop, and some of the elements in scaling your idea will go into that. So create a compelling pitch deck to be able to tell your story concisely and impactfully. The fifth is to demonstrate traction and validation, rather. So if you have early traction or validation, so this can come from engagement, customer testimony, or sales, you're going to want to be able to showcase it to prove your ideas are gaining momentum. As I mentioned a bit earlier, investors right now are really looking for some sort of tangible and immediate, I say immediate because space still is somewhat of a long tail game, ROI. And so if you have use cases, if you have validation from credible experts in the field, like we talked about before, definitely use those to your advantage because it can help give a stamp of approval. One thing that I will also note here, which I find quite interesting, is that in the space ecosystem, the government and the commercial sector are really still intrinsically entwined. And so oftentimes when commercial space companies will be pitching commercial investors, the investor will often ask who in the government is interested in your product or service. I have seen companies often get puzzled by this question because they're wondering, you're a private investment. Why are you asking about the government? But in any sort of space strategy, the government is still a customer and the government is still a regulator and the government is still a validator. So having someone in the government who believes in your product, who may give a purchase order down the road when it gets to a level of fruition, or has even just expressed interest in it, can go a very long way, even when you purely want to get commercial dollars. The next is showcasing the market opportunity. We gave you strategies above of how to actually do this, but you really want to clearly present the size of your target market and the potential of its growth. And so investors are really interested in businesses with significant market potential. And if you want to know how your company plays within the market and where the potential is, please go back and view the first workshop because I talk about all of the market trends and the technology trends that are really shaping the future of space and how you might be able to take advantage of them. The seventh is to focus on the team. We talked a bit before about why it's important to attract the right team, but investors often invest as much in the team as they do the idea. And so having a highly slated, group of experts and experience on your team with a proven track record or the ability to execute your business plan successfully will actually go a long way. People invest in people as much as they do the product, and they want to know that you have the right abilities to be able to move within the volatility of the market and A/B test and pivot, as we mentioned, when it's necessary. Offering a clear exit strategy, this is pretty self-explanatory, but understanding for investors when they are going to get their money back and how you plan to do that. The ninth is that you want to be transparent and realistic. We talked about this before about being realistic with your, tech development timeline. Space is hard. People know space is hard. Anybody who is investing in it, anybody who's interacting with it understands this. And so you want to think through all the potential risks and challenges that your startup may face. And investors are really going to appreciate the honesty and the realistic assessment. And they're going to want to understand what your strengths and your weaknesses are. If you do have weaknesses, that's okay. You can round it out with talent. You can round it out with a partnership, but you need to be honest and you need to have a clear roadmap of then how you're going to mitigate those pitfalls. We mentioned some of those earlier about the product and the business pitfalls. Definitely go back and look at those because those are some of the considerations for this aspect. The 10th is that you want to practice your pitch. Practice, 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 brief, brief, brief. I have been told quite a few times by entrepreneurs that they don't need to practice their pitch because they believe that they are very good at public speaking. Everybody gets nervous. Even if you are a great public speaker, you never know how you're going to react in different circumstances. So one of the best things you can do is to know it cold, to know it inside and out, know it inherently. What you also need to know is that your pitch is not one size fits all. We talk about this in the first workshop when we discuss how to actually formulate your value proposition and how to put it into your pitch deck. While there may be core elements of your business that will stay the same, your pitch has to be tailored to who you're talking to. So practice, 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 and have multiple versions because you want to make sure that you are hitting at the impact statement that is going to relate to who that investor is. The 11th, which seems pretty straightforward, but often people fail at, is to follow up and follow through. So after the pitch, you need to follow up with the investor and address any questions or additional concerns. This will, one, show your commitment by following through on promised actions, but also sometimes people leave the onus on the investor to reach out to them, and that is just actually a really bad business practice. The onus is on you to keep the relationship open and to be forthcoming with any questions they might have, or be forthcoming with additional information that you thought you should have covered and wanted to get in front of them. So please follow up and follow through. And then the last strategy, and this is going to be dependent on what your actual relationship is, but you want to negotiate your terms wisely. You do not just want to jump at the first funding opportunity that comes to you just because there's been interest expressed and money is given to you. You want to be able to negotiate the terms of this investment, and don't be afraid to negotiate the terms of the investment. Sometimes companies think that they have to take it or the investor will walk away. That's generally not the case. It's a business consideration on both sides. And again, as I mentioned in the beginning, the type of money you take can have implications on your long-term strategy and scalability goals. So do this judiciously. You want to seek legal advice as much as you can to be able to get a second opinion to really ensure that the terms are fair and that they align with your long-term goals. And so after all of these, really what I want to leave you with is that securing investment for any sort of idea or any sort of startup is often challenging and it is time consuming, but it is worth it. So you want to stay persistent. You want to keep refining your strategy based on the feedback that you give. Again, going back to the art of the pivot. And you really want to be open to adjusting your approach as you navigate your fundraising journey. If you realize that a certain aspect of funding you're going after isn't available, don't be afraid to go after a different avenue. Just adjust your strategy accordingly. So having a strong value proposition, a well-prepared pitch, and really a clear vision for your business will significantly improve your chances of attracting the right investor, but will also give you those fundamental tools to be able to pivot with. We have reached the end of our time together today, but I really want to thank you for, listening in and engaging through this strategy. If you are interested, we will be conducting a live Q&A with me on August 23rd at 11 a.m. Eastern. You can register on the same website that you access this workshop through. And so please tune in and come ready with questions. I would love to engage with you. And the last thing that I want to plug is that our final workshop in this 3-part series will be available on September 6th, and it will cover how to position your product or service to create champions and gain customers. I really want to thank you for your time and attention, and please remember that the space ecosystem needs your great idea. There is a place for everyone in space, and I hope you'll join us. Thank you.
In JSEP, young entrepreneurs utilize newly gained knowledge to identify and solve space industry problems through business development. Become a community advocate and inspire future space entrepreneurs.